Is my penis normal? I can't tell you how many times people ask me this in clinic. Today, we are going to talk about average penile length. So what determines penile length?
Okay, let's talk about something, well, something a lot of people think about, maybe even worry about, don't always say out loud. Is my penis normal?
Right.
It's apparently a question Dr. Rena Malik, who's a urologist and pelvic surgeon, hears all the time in her clinic.
Constantly, yeah. It's incredibly common.
So today, we're going to really unpack this. We're moving past, just guessing and digging into the actual facts, the data from some of the biggest studies out there on average penile length.
Exactly. And our mission here really is to pull out the key takeaways, the sort of surprising bits of info from Dr. Malik's insights on this.
Okay.
So by the end, you listening should have some really clear evidence-based answers. And maybe more importantly, understand what it all actually means beyond just centimeters or inches.
Great. So where do we start? The basics, I guess. What actually determines penis length in the first place?
Well, genetics are a huge part of it, no doubt. That's the foundation.
But not the only part.
No, definitely not. Dr. Malik points out there could be other factors too, maybe environmental things, hormones during development. It's complex. And crucially, you have to understand variability. It's not like one fixed number for your whole life.
Right.
I mean, even for one person, the measurement can change quite a bit depending on, say, how aroused you are.
Okay.
Or even if you're cold, anxiety can affect it too.
Really anxiety.
Yeah. And then over your lifetime, things like losing testosterone or blood flow problems from high blood pressure or diabetes, those can also cause changes.
Huh. So right off the bat, we're seeing it's not this static thing at all. That's actually pretty interesting.
It really is. Which leads directly into the next point. How do scientists even measure this stuff accurately?
Yeah, how do you get an average?
Well, first you've got to be specific. Are we talking flaccid,
Yeah.
stretched, erect?
Okay.
And maybe most importantly, how was it measured? That detail is absolutely critical.
And Dr. Malik mentioned the gold standard study for this, right? Not just some quick poll.
Exactly. She highlights this massive review. It compiled data from 20 different studies.
Wow, 20.
Yeah, looking at over 15,000 men. So this is serious, robust research we're talking about.
15,000. Okay, that's a solid sample size.
Absolutely. And the way they measured was super strict.
How so?
Well, first off, all measurements were done by a doctor or another healthcare provider.
So no self-reporting, which can be unreliable.
Precisely. Avoids that potential for exaggeration people sometimes mention. And they measured from the very tip of the glands, the head, down to the pubic bone.
Okay.
Specifically on the top side, the dorsum. And they'd push in any fatty tissue at the base to get right to the bone.
Got it. Makes sense for consistency.
Right. They measured flaccid length and also stretched length. And one interesting finding was that the maximum stretched length is actually pretty similar to erect length in most cases.
Oh, okay.
They also measured circumference, around the penis, usually at the base or mid-shaft, in both flaccid and erect states. And one more crucial detail. The studies they included specifically excluded men who had known penile issues, like Peyronie's disease, which causes curvature, or plaques, things like that.
So they were trying to get a baseline of healthy, typical anatomy.
Exactly. A baseline for comparison.
Okay, methodology sounds solid. So
Okay.
the big reveal. What are the actual average numbers from this huge study?
Let's get to it. So the average flaccid length, it came out to about 3.6 inches.
3.6 inches flaccid. Okay, that's about 9.1 centimeters for those using metric.
Correct. And then for both stretched and erect length, which remember was found to be pretty similar.
Yeah.
The average was between 5.1 and 5.2 inches.
5.1 to 5.2 inches, so roughly 13-ish centimeters, 13.1 or 13.2 centimeters.
Exactly. And for average erect circumference, the girth,
Mhm.
the study reported that between 9.3 and 11.6 centimeters.
Okay, 9.3 to 11.6 centimeters around, which is roughly 3.6 to 4.6 inches in circumference.
Right. Those are the numbers from the big review.
And you mentioned Dr. Malik talked about another older study, something related to a TV show.
Yeah, she mentioned reacting to a clip from Scrubs, I think, which referenced an older UK-based study,
Yeah.
mostly Caucasian men in that one.
Look how they compare.
She said the numbers were actually very, very similar to this larger, more recent review.
That's pretty strong validation then, isn't it? That consistency across studies.
It really is. It suggests these figures are quite reliable. But here's where it gets really fascinating.
Okay.
The gap between these numbers and what men think is average. Dr. Malik points out that most men surveyed tend to believe that 6 inches is the average erect length.
6 inches, so quite a bit longer than the measured average of around 5.1, 5.2.
Exactly. There's a significant perception gap there, a real difference between the scientific reality and the common belief.
Wow. Why do you think that gap exists? Media.
It's likely a combination of things, yeah. Media portrayals, cultural myths, maybe even pornography, setting unrealistic expectations. It creates this sort of widespread anxiety based on misinformation.
Yeah, I can see that. So, okay, we have the numbers, we see the perception gap. What's the big takeaway for someone listening right now? What does Dr. Malik stress most?
The absolute most important message, and she's very clear on this, is that penile length is simply not the be-all and end-all for sexual pleasure.
Right. It's not the main event, so to speak.
Not at all. It's just not the primary factor in determining satisfaction for partners.
And Dr. Malik apparently has a lot of content focusing on pleasure itself, particularly female anatomy, which puts this in perspective.
Absolutely. She explains, for instance, that women derive the vast majority of their pleasure from the clitoris,
Okay.
which anatomically is actually quite similar in structure to the penis they develop from the same tissue, but it's mostly internal, within the vulva.
Yeah.
It's incredibly sensitive.
So the focus on penis length for female pleasure is somewhat misplaced.
Largely misplaced, yes.
Right.
While society, and like we said, maybe porn, often emphasizes a large penis as being crucial, it's really not the most important factor when it comes to actual shared pleasure and intimacy. And maybe even more significantly, it's definitely not something you should tie your self-worth to.
That's a powerful point. Shifting the focus entirely.
It is. It moves the conversation from size to connection, technique, communication. Things that actually build satisfaction.
Okay. That reframes things considerably. But let's say someone is still concerned, maybe not about function, but just about the appearance. Are there any safe options?
Yes. And Dr. Malik does offer a couple of simple, very practical tips. These aren't about actually increasing size, because that's generally not feasible safely, but about potentially making the penis appear a bit longer.
Okay, what are they?
They're straightforward, really. First, managing pubic hair. Removing hair from the mons pubis.
That's the area right above the base of the penis.
Exactly. That little mound of fatty tissue. Keeping the hair there trimmed or removed can make the penis look more prominent.
Okay, simple enough. What's the second tip?
Losing weight if someone is overweight.
How does that help?
Because sometimes excess fat can accumulate in that same area, the mons pubis, sort of obscuring the base of the penis.
Ah, I see. So reducing that fat pad can reveal a bit more of the penis shaft that was already there.
Precisely. It's about visibility, not changing the actual structure. Safe, non-invasive things.
Makes sense. So wrapping this up then, the core message from Dr. Malik and from this deep dive into the science seems pretty clear.
Yeah, I think so. It really boils down to focus on pleasure, connection, and overall well-being, not just penis size.
You've got the real numbers now, based on solid research, around 3.6 inches flaccid, 5.1 to 5.2 inches erect, on average.
Right.
But maybe even more valuable than the numbers is the context. Understanding the variability, the perception gap, and especially the science around pleasure and anatomy. The real deep dive here isn't just the measurement, it's understanding what truly matters for satisfaction and, frankly, for self-worth.
Absolutely. And maybe a final thought for you to consider as you process all this.
Yeah.
Think about how much our view of things, like our bodies, is shaped by stories we hear, by society, versus actual scientific facts.
That's a good point.
In a world that's often obsessed with metrics, with sometimes totally unrealistic ideals, how much power do you gain by understanding that difference? By recognizing the gap between the narrative and the reality.
Yeah.
Maybe it helps you redefine what normal or valuable means for yourself based on better information. It's worth thinking about where we get our information from,
Yeah.
and how that shapes how we see ourselves and our experiences.
Is my penis normal? I can't tell you how many times people ask me this in clinic. I'm Dr. Rena Malik, urologist and pelvic surgeon, and today we are going to talk about average penile length. So what determines penile length? Well, penile length is primarily determined by genetics, but there's also factors from the environment or hormonal factors that can play a role. You could check out my video on how to increase penile size, but there's not many things that are effective and safe that you can do easily. But at the end, I will share some really simple, easy things that can help your penis appear a little bit longer. And it's important, before I get into the numbers, if you are going to measure your penis or get your penis measured, realize that it is variable even person to person. It can vary depending on the state of arousal, how cold you are, how anxious you are, and it can change over a lifetime due to loss of testosterone or loss of blood flow due to conditions like high blood pressure, diabetes, or other things that can affect blood flow to the penis. All right, let's get right down to it. What is the average penile length? Well, when you ask that question, you have to specify, do you mean erect? Do you mean flaccid? And how was it measured? So the largest study we have compiles data from 20 different studies looking at over 15,000 men. When they measure it both flaccid and stretched or erect, and actually they've looked at studies and found that when you stretch your penis maximally, that's also similar to the size you're gonna get when it's erect. They measured it from the tip of the gland, so the very tip of the penis, to the what we call the pubopenile junction, so where the penis hits the bone, and that's after pushing in the fat a little bit. And so you measure it on the top side. When you look down, that's called the dorsum of the penis, and that's where you measure it. They measure it both flaccid and stretched, and in some circumstances erect. They can also measure the flaccid or erect circumference, so that means the size around the penis. And they either take that measurement at the base of the penis or at the mid shaft of the penis. And specifically, they only include studies in this review that had measurements done by a physician or healthcare provider, because you can imagine if someone's measuring themselves, they're going to have a tendency to overinflate those numbers. They also didn't include patients who had problems with their penis, like Peyronie's disease or plaques or curvatures or anything like that. So what they found, the average flaccid length was about 3.6 inches or 9.1 centimeters. When they looked at both stretched and erect length, that was between 5.1 and 5.2 inches or 13.1 or 13.2 centimeters. When looking at the erect circumference or measurement around, they found it to be between 3.6 and 4.6 centimeters or 9.3 centimeters to 11.6 centimeters. And if you look at my very old video reacting to scrubs, I reviewed a study that looked at primarily Caucasian UK-based men, and the numbers were very, very similar. But if you look at what men think is average, most men think that 6 inches is the average length of the penis. And so most people think that they should be longer than the average person. If you take anything away from my channel, you should realize that penile length is not the be-all end-all for pleasure. I've made tons of videos talking about pleasure and female anatomy, and if you've watched those, you know that women derive the majority of their pleasure from the clitoris, which is the homologue or analogous to the penis of the man. And so they get a lot of pleasure from the clitoris, which actually anatomically looks very similar to the penis, but it's all on the inside of the vulva. While having a large penis is touted to be so important, it's actually not the most valuable thing when it comes to pleasure, and it's definitely not what you should value your worth to be. However, if you're thinking about, ways to increase penile length, of course, watch my video where I go over all the options, but a simple way would be to remove the hair that's on the mons, and that will make your penis look a little bit longer. Also, if you can lose weight, that will help alleviate some of that fat that's sitting on top of the mons, which is the area right above the penis, and your penis will then appear longer. And bottom line, focus on pleasure and not penile size. But if you want to know the numbers, now you have them. And as always, remember to take care of yourself because you're worth it.